What is up, everybody? Welcome into the NFL Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis, where things are getting kicked off here in a big way, especially through a Bills lens. We heard from Joe Brady, Bills head coach, new head coach. His first press conference in Indy happened right down the line here a few hours ago. We heard from Brandon Beane. Both of them did side scrums. We're going to talk about some of the big takeaways from that today in this first episode of Shout from the Combine. Ryan Talbot, how are you, my friend?
Hey, I'm doing great. Excited to get into everything. Brandon Beane had some good things to say. Joe Brady has already mastered not saying much of anything when responding to questions, a true head coach, but it's still interesting nonetheless.
It is, and I think like the best place to start is the wide receiver position, because if we're putting this into focus this week, to me, this regime really is going to be able to make its biggest impact in year one. And I'm talking about Joe Brady, this newfound leadership profile of Brandon Beane kind of leading the football operation with what they do at the receiver position this offseason. And one of the things that Joe Brady said that I think stuck out to both of us was his comments about Khalil Shakir, because at times this past season, especially, but really throughout the entire tenure of Joe Brady, there's been this frustration of a guy that was drafted in the 5th round years ago that I think Brandon Beane was very open about, a versatile skill set that we just haven't really seen utilized in any iteration of the offense since Khalil Shakir was drafted. And Shakir's been very complimentary of Joe Brady since he got the job. He said he wouldn't be the receiver he is today without Joe Brady and what he's meant to him. But I think that there's more to unlock with Khalil Shakir, and Joe Brady said as much. He said, this is something that we think he can do more than just be a slot inside receiver. He can go on the outside. And so I kind of followed up with, all right, what does that mean for the position? Will that be something that when you're going and evaluating all these wide receivers this week and over the next couple of months leading up to the draft, if there maybe is a similar skill set, and I'm thinking of a KC Concepcion out of Texas A&M, that's a guy that I'd probably take off the board or lower considerably, knowing what we know about this regime in years past. If you have something on the roster already, maybe that's not something you want to lean into too much. And he's like, we want good football players. You don't want redundancy, but you're going to bring in guys that you feel like can make an impact. And I think maybe having a different idea for what Khalil Shakir can be in this new iteration of the offense could open up how they view some of these prospects, specifically at the wide receiver position.
And you would hope so, right? I mean, Khalil Shakir has not always been that, but screen guy, short pass guy. There were times, Rams game a few years ago, the shootout, he went downfield, caught a deep ball from Josh Allen, and I think he either scored or got knocked out near the goal line. Doesn't matter there. Some other plays against Pittsburgh in his career where he's gone downfield, made some big plays, catching the ball, scoring touchdowns. It's not always been what we've seen, especially this past season, where it felt like short pass, short pass, short pass. And it got so predictable. And don't get me wrong, Shakir is really good at following his blocks and turning nothing into something, but there's so much more to his skill set than what we saw this year. So that's exciting to me. And knowing that the Bills are open to the idea of maybe playing him on the outside a little bit more and using him and his skill set more than just that quick pass guy. That might open up things for Keon Coleman to be a big slot receiver. That might open up things for Joshua Palmer in terms of how they can use him, who they draft in this year's draft, whether it's day 1 or day 2, because I think they will add a receiver earlier in this draft, maybe even double dip with another receiver on day 2 or day 3, excuse me, of the draft. So knowing that he's going in with a fresh perspective, maybe also acknowledging that the offense that we saw this past season isn't necessarily what his true vision for the offense should be.
And it's funny you bring up the vision for the offense, because one of the other questions that Joe Brady was asked about was, really getting into the weeds on what Aaron Kromer meant to this run game the last couple of seasons and what it's going to look like now that he's not here anymore. And he said, listen, obviously Aaron Kromer meant a lot to what they did in the run game, but it's been a collaboration. It's going to continue to be that. He mentioned that he has a lot of belief in Pat Meyer to come in here and develop guys in the offensive line. And then if you think about
You're cutting up on me there, Matt.
Gotten very close. Aaron Kromer's been very complimentary of Boris as well. He's going to now be the run game coordinator. And I think there's a lot of belief that they can kind of continue to rinse and repeat what's worked in the run game, get that to kind of continue. But the biggest question is, who are going to fill the role of center and left guard?
I think we lost you again there for a minute. I was waiting to see if you came out of this. Can you hear me now? The internet's being a little it's breaking up on you quite a bit. I heard a little bit about Kromer. Oh, there we go. Matt, I think, is changing his internet right now. So going back to what he was talking about with replacing Aaron Kromer, obviously we've discussed this a little bit. Huge shoes to fill when it comes to replacing the offensive line coach that did such a great job there. Oh, he's back now. Dude, looking a lot sharper now too.
That is better than Indy Combine internet. We got big time problems going on right here.
Hey, listen, I don't think I have as many people using the internet as you do there in the background. So I think that's part
listen. If I fall off again, you just take over and you just take us all the way home. I have full confidence and faith in you. We'll see how this internet holds up. How much of that did you get though? Where did I kind of trail off?
Heard Kromer, heard Rob Boris a little bit. There were some definite breaks in between. I tried to tell you when I couldn't hear you, but then I didn't know if you could hear me back. So I heard some of the thoughts on how they're going to replace Kromer, but I do agree with your overall sentiment that I do think the Bills can kind of pick up where they left off. Last year, running the ball so effectively, it's not going to be easy replacing Aaron Kromer, one of the best, easily a top 3 O-line coach in this league. But at the same time, the Bills with their current O-linemen, and that's what is your next talking point, is the fact that there's 2 guys hitting the market. They have enough right there right now with the 3 guys, and then also Alec Anderson, who's played a big role at times, and then potentially bringing back one of those 2 guys. So either Connor McGovern or David Edwards. So I wanted you to let you pivot back to what you were speaking about there.
Yeah, so I thought one of the comments that Brady made on Alec Anderson today was, maybe a little bit of a clue as to what is going to happen on the offensive line. I think that in a perfect world, they'd love to bring back McGovern and David Edwards, but I don't think financially, and I think even Brandon Beane brought it up at one point, there are constraints to what the Bills can do with their salary cap. Sure, you can open up $70 million in cap space if you play with the spot tracker, over the cap tools, and do all these different things, but there's certain elements that play into that will probably limit some of the moves that he can make financially. So if a guy prices himself out, you have to have an answer, whether it be on the roster or how you're going to add. The free agency market, like, are you going to bring somebody in at guard? Thinking about Alec Anderson, and one of the comments that Joe Brady made today on Anderson was, I want him going into next season after signing this new deal, thinking, I want to go and win one of these jobs. Even if you're bringing guys back, that's the mindset that you want to have. And I sit here and think, we start to think about rookies that will come in next year, depending on where they're drafted, or free agents that they go out and they get. Are those guys going to be in a better spot to maybe win one of these jobs over a guy like Alec Anderson, who I think sometimes we downplay how impressive he was. If you think back to that Pittsburgh Steelers game, he slides in there at right tackle against TJ Watt and company, who's spectacular. And I think that there's a lot more runway for what he can be. And maybe he could be your interior player of the future, depending on how he plays next season, and maybe be that next iteration of David Edwards, or however it shakes out. If you want Cedric Van Pran-Granger to take over at center, if you want to re-sign Connor McGovern and slot him in and put Anderson in left guard, you have some options and there's some continuity because he's been in the system for so long.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you mentioned it. You probably can't re-sign both. There are financial ramifications if you were try to bring back both of these players. You mentioned pulling levers on certain contracts. Eventually, it catches up to teams. So the Bills have to be smart about this. I think in an ideal world, they try to bring back one of those 2 players. But even if they can't bring back either, you're right. Alec Anderson has shown that he can play at tackle. He can play on the interior. He deserves a chance to go in and compete for a starting job and to have that mindset going into 2026. Tylen Grable's a forgotten about player, it almost feels like, where I know he won the swing tackle job as a rookie, but there's some belief that he can kick on to the interior as well. So maybe he's in play. Cedric Van Pran Granger was not a draft pick that many years ago, and there's been some injury issues for sure early in his tenure, but now this is his opportunity. So I feel like the Bills are in a good spot in terms of who they already have on this roster. And then if they can bring back one of those guys, you can fill in the other pieces with some veteran free agents for depth. We've seen Brandon Beane do that time and time again. Low-cost veterans that can compete for that final depth role. It's happened a few times in his tenure here. You can draft a guy again, which they've made a habit of doing in each draft class, it feels like. So I feel like the O-line, it sounds weird to say with two starters potentially leaving, I feel like it's in better shape than a lot of people give it credit for.
I want to spend a few minutes quickly on wide receiver, because there was one more thing that I think Brandon said in his secondary scrum that I might even pull out and write about on the site about Keon Coleman. And of course, continuing the same line of speech that's come out from Joe Brady and Brandon Beane since the move off of Sean McDermott happened, but very supportive of Keon Coleman. But he said something in the pursuit of wide receiver that I thought was interesting, and what he wanted to do maybe in that room as they reshape it through free agency and the draft. And he mentioned somebody that can win at the line of scrimmage, they can get involved in like with quick slants and quick routes. And he said that prototypical X wide receiver, and they want to find that, whether that be a new player or Keon Coleman. And I thought the way that he kind of prefaced that is that, you know, that might not be Keon Coleman. Maybe they're going into this offseason with the idea that if that ends up being Keon, when you get to training camp and you get to the season and he wins that role, fine. But right now you almost have to operate as if that's not going to be the case. And I want to piggyback off this. And another thing that he said about Keon, he said when some of the new offensive coaches, and there aren't a lot of new ones, obviously Pete Carmichael is the offensive coordinator, but then the wide receivers coach in Drew Terrell, as those guys have gotten in here and gotten a sense of who Keon is, they remember him from the draft process, there's some new ideas in the building about how they want to utilize him. I'm wondering, Ryan, are we on the way to Keon becoming more of that big slot? They can bring in a more prototypical X, whether that be in the draft with a bunch of guys we've already kind of started to talk about.
Getting a little choppy again, Matt. You were on a roll there, but the very end there, you just broke up a little bit. Just a few seconds.
There's a bunch of different options that I think they can think about as they look at this X receiver spot, and then have a little bit more versatility with how they deploy Khalil Shakir and then Keon Coleman as well.
Yeah, and speaking of options, Matt, head over to Tops for the Bring Home the Cold with freezer savings. Find the coolest way to save the season at Tops from now to February 28th. Every $40 you spend on participating frozen brands earns you $10 back. Fill your freezer with family favorites and earn big rewards while you shop. The more you stock up, the more you save. So going back to what you were talking about with Keon Coleman, I think that they have to have all options open. With Coleman being that slot receiver, it just hasn't worked as the X receiver. And I would hate for them to go in with that being a big part of their plan is, okay, the maturity is finally going to catch up to Keon Coleman. We're going to see him unlock and play more like the player he was in that Ravens game in week 1. That's a terrible plan if that is the plan. And I don't think that's what the Bills are going to do. So give him the versatility, the ability to maybe move around and play out of the slot. And, you know, in terms of what the Bills do, there's options in the draft, there's options in free agency, although it feels like with each passing hour, more and more players are going to be franchise tagged or across the league in many positions. So it's going to be kind of not as many great options as maybe people thought at receiver. I'm sitting here and I don't know if what else you've caught today, but Ryan Poles of the Bears pretty much said DJ Moore is available. And I know that he's not. We've talked about him.
You're on the DJ Moore train. You're fully on board.
I'm fully on. 1,100 yards both seasons with Joe Brady, can play that X receiver. I've seen him make a lot of big plays as of last year. I know the overall stat line wasn't outstanding last year, but he's also in an offense where they had a great 1-2 punch at running back. They had Roma Dunze, who started out the year very hot, Luther Burden, a great young tight end. So there was a lot of targets to go around, but DJ Moore is available, and maybe the Bears are willing to eat a little bit of that salary based on the pick that you send back. I think he can be had for an early day 3 pick, or maybe 2 picks, but I think 1 could potentially get it done because they want to release, get that contract off the books to get financially healthy. It addresses what the Bills need, and it also allows them to keep that first-round pick where they can go BPA on, maybe a Jim Leonard defensive player that he thinks is going to fit the mold of what he wants to do.
Let's get into the defensive side of the ball here, and a couple of players that kind of came up through both of the press conferences today. And I want to start with Greg Rousseau because he was kind of a topic with both Joe Brady and Brandon Beane and how he's kind of envisioned this defense. And it feels like there's limitless potential with how they see like they're going to be able to deploy him. And Brandon said something interesting. He basically said, tell me who we end up bringing in, and then I'll tell you the best way we can kind of set him up and how we're going to deploy him in this defense. It's going to look, I think, different based on the personnel that they end up bringing in. So if they want him to be that 3-4, prototypical stand-up edge linebacker, that's something they think that he can potentially do, or maybe they're just saying that at this point. I think that there's some interesting ways that you can deploy him on the interior of the line. They believe they have a nose tackle on the roster right now that can play in a 3-4. I think Ed Oliver could probably do it. Deion Walker can do it. Maybe there's a world that you live in where you bring in a bunch of different styles of edge rusher. Javon Solomon, I think, is going to be a part of the math as well. But Greg Rousseau, to me, feels like a guy that they're still banking on being a big piece of this defense, no matter where they figure out how to fit him in the scheme under Jim Leonard.
Yeah, when they hired Jim Leonard, I had Greg Rousseau as one of my 3 players that I think was going to thrive in this system. It was Rousseau, it was Cole Bishop, and obviously it was Christian Benford. And those 2 guys on the back end are obviously going to be key players. But, as that edge linebacker, what do you want to call him, the stand-up, I feel like the athleticism is there, the wingspan is there. There's a lot of good stuff that he has done in Buffalo. I know it hasn't always transferred over to sacks. He's been outstanding as a run defender. But you sit there and you say, okay, with a more aggressive scheme, he seems like a player that could really benefit from what Jim Leonard wants to do. And I truly believe that. Now, part of it is he has to stay healthy. He's had some nagging injuries that he's played through that have slowed him down a little bit. We find out after the season sometimes. But if he can stay healthy based on the athleticism that we saw, he's still a very young player. I know it feels weird saying that after he's been in the league for so many years, but I think that this shift to Jim Leonard's defense, a more aggressive scheme, can really play to the strengths of Greg Rousseau.
Michael Wild believes that there's been some Keon Coleman bashing in this episode of the Shop podcast. I don't think that that's necessarily happened at all. And I think that you have to reimagine some of the things with Keon moving forward, right? Like, I think what Brandon said today is the expectation is he has a great summer, just like he had last year. I mean, I don't think you could find anybody that was higher on Keon Coleman last summer than you were when we were talking about him coming to practice every single day and balling out. You get to the season, he has a breakout first game, and then it just didn't go his way the rest of the way for whatever reason. You're wiping the slate clean. You're going to bring him back and most likely in a role that's going to be different. I think you're going to reimagine this room a little bit because I don't think going into year 3 with him, you want to bank on the role that he's been in, that it just hasn't worked for whatever reason, that he's going to fill that role. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that you can't find a new, even better role for Keon Coleman, but wasn't the argument made week after week during the draft process that he wasn't going to be a great X receiver in this league? I mean, his draft comp, if you go to NFL.com, was Drake London, and the Bills don't barely ever play him out of the slot. That just seems like it might be a cleaner path to consistency in year 3 for Keon Coleman than continuing to ask him to do something that it's just been very inconsistent in that role.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of those things. Is I have a dog that won't stop barking.
That's okay. It's been a chaotic episode.
So yeah, it's one of those issues with Coleman, where you're right. Go back to the summer. We had so many headlines and bylines, or headlines and podcast, our stories where Keon Coleman was one of the top players that we talked about day in, day out. He was our player of the day over and over again. And then week one looked great. You're like, okay, he's really putting it together in year two. And now it just faded away after that. And then you had the maturity issues, and you had the benching, you had inactive. Last year didn't go well. It was not a good year two for him overall. I don't think we're saying anything that's bashing. So now that,
and I don't think he needs to be coddled either.
No,
at
absolutely
this point,
not.
Right? Like he needs the opposite of that.
Right. He needs to know what the expectations are. And I think he does now in terms of what it takes to be a pro. And if he wants to succeed, not just with the Bills, but in this league in general. So this is a huge season for him. And Joe Brady was the first to say when he got hired, I told Keon Coleman, I'm going to be like the best thing for his career, essentially. So I think they know that they need to unlock him and let him play out of the slot, let him move around a little bit. And that doesn't mean that he has to be exclusively a big slot, but you can move him around a little bit. And I think that's going to help him out significantly.
All right. The other name I wanted to bring up was Taran Johnson. Brandon Beane was asked point blank if moving him to safety is at all in consideration. And he said nothing's off the table with Taran. And that's one of the really big key takeaways from Jim Leonhard a couple of weeks ago, was talking about how much he likes the player, but reading between the lines, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to find a role. And there's some savings, not a lot. I think you add like $2 million if you were to move on from Taran Johnson. He's been a long time, really good player in this defense. I think there's an argument to be made that he's not the same player he was 2-3 seasons ago when, he was playing at an all pro level. And the projection moving him back to safety is a complicated one. He's never played the position. I mean, he's somebody that I think there's been some issues with, diagnosing and triggering to the ball as a slot corner. Maybe that looks different in a safety role. Maybe he's more conditioned at this stage of his career to play that deep safety role. And then you can ask Cole Bishop to play more up in the box. Although, I like the idea of maybe going out and letting Jim Leonhard canvas the college scene and find another safety that he can pair with Cole Bishop and on a rookie contract all the same. So I don't know where you're at, Ryan. I think the better place to be with Taran Johnson might end up being moving on completely. Where do you fall on it?
Yeah, that's exactly where I fall. I mean, I'm glad that nothing is off the table. I just don't see how you can get a smooth transition from him from cornerback to safety at this point, never playing a new scheme. I know that Jim Leonhard would love him for the leadership perspective, what he's meant to this team in this locker room. But there are some times where players just aren't a good fit anymore. And it feels like with the way that he's played the last few years, he's been banged up. He plays such a physical style, and I feel like it's caught up to him over the last few years where he's lost a step. I think moving on is ultimately what happens in the case of Taran Johnson. If that's not the case, I'll be happy to eat crow if he somehow is a good fit into this system and plays well. It just, to me, does not make sense to expect him to be able to just make this smooth transition over to safety.
We have a super chat here. A reporter asked Beane, why did you get promoted and why did Sean get fired? LMFAO, who was that reporter? It was, that's that opening scrum that you saw streamed. That's everybody that's at the combine can ask questions. So a lot of the local reporters, we were going to do some of the side work, some of the stuff that we've been talking about here on the podcast. And so a lot of those questions are coming from people that have different angles they're chasing. And that's something that we covered quite a bit a month ago, right? Like at the Terry Pegula press conference, he was asked about, Terry was even asked about that, kind of talked about how much people around the league tell him how great of a roster they've had and over the years. And I think that, was perplexing to a lot of fans. But that's still something that hasn't necessarily been answered. So it was kind of a comical moment there. And Brandon tried to pivot off of it and said that was kind of a better question for Terry Pegula. And we're kind of moving on from that. But it was kind of funny. And the reporter actually asked the question and then he had that response and he just turned and walked right away. So it was kind of funny.
Yeah. So, essentially some national reporter or a reporter for another outlet that maybe isn't on the Buffalo beat. But yeah, it's fascinating to at least ask that. And, I will say Brandon was right. That's something that you should ask Terry Pagula, not him, because at the end of the day, it's Pagula that made the decision in both cases.
We will be back here every day at the Combine all the way up until Friday. The receivers go on Friday, so we'll have a ton of content on that day as we dive into a lot of these prospects. I'm hoping to catch up with a couple draft experts over the course of this week, and obviously I'll be back with Ryan as well, hopefully in a spot that has a little bit better internet. Apologies for that experience. This Saturday, Ryan, we are back at Wingnuts, 1402 Millersport Highway. I hope everybody can come out and have a great time with us.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time. Always outstanding food, atmosphere, beers, you name it. We'll have a lot to talk about as we break down the Combine, look ahead a little bit to free agency and who's still out there on the market.
All right, everybody, have a great Tuesday night. We'll